Hello, you're very welcome along to the Tackling Sport podcast. It's your host, Daniel Hussey, back after Sean Hussey was in the hot seat last week. Sean, how's it getting on, and how did you get on in the hot seat in general?
No, it was good. Obviously, two different podcast episodes. One was obviously a Cricket World Cup preview for Ireland, and obviously disappointment in their first game, and they've two games to try and bounce back and qualify for the next stage. And then obviously we had an episode on that historic night in Hampden Park, and a historic night for Irish women's football. So we looked at the potential draw Ireland can get in the World Cup that's coming on Saturday this weekend, the big draw. So we were kind of teasing it out whether we want in America and England or maybe another country. Obviously, Spain are in complete turmoil at the moment. So there is options there for Ireland and in pot three as well. And as Alan and Luke both made the point that Europe's the hardest confederation to qualify out of. So Ireland will certainly fancy their chances of getting some points. And it all depends how much based on who are the top two seeds we get. So it's an exciting time. And it's obviously something to look forward to now in the summer, especially when the dark days of the winter come in.
Yeah, and if you haven't listened to it, I would recommend it. You learn a lot ahead of Saturday morning straw. I think it's like 5:15 or something in the morning. We're going to find out, as Sean touched on there and the guys touched on. We are in pot three, so we've half a chance of getting an all right group, particularly with the pot four seeds there. But yeah, it's exciting times. Australia, New Zealand, the final is going to be in Sydney, so a lot to look forward to in the Irish Women's World Cup. The Irish Men's Cricket 2020 World Cup hasn't started too well for Ireland. By the time you listen back to this podcast, they'll have played Scotland, so we won't delve too much into that. But if you still want a full preview of the World Cup, as Sean mentioned, with a Andrew Blair White, friend of the podcast, who's also tipped up, spoiler alert, New Zealand at a decent price there as well. You can find that in your podcast feeds. That's episodes 162 and 161, respectively. Okay, so this week, if you are listening on the podcast, you'll find the description timestamps, whether you're listening on YouTube or your podcast feeds. We are going to cover Liverpool versus Manchester City and the fallout, a little bit on some of the other Premier League clubs and potentially some managers under pressure. Myself and Sean want to kind of do a small bit of a roundup on our own thoughts on the GAA Club Finals. There's a lot happening at the moment in Club GAA, despite what some journalists might say regarding intercounty football. Right, Sean, let's start at the top. Liverpool versus Manchester City. For me, this was an incredible game of football for a number of reasons. The fallout from it, the fact the referee dominated the storyline there, given Anthony Taylor let it go. Your initial thoughts firstly, I guess, before we get into nuts and bolts on it, of how big a win was that for Liverpool? Because I touched on this talking on another podcast that if Liverpool had lost, they'd be 16 points behind. That's the narrative, obviously. But the fact they win their game in hand, it's now 7 points. And I know it's only a 6-pointer, but really it felt like a 9-pointer.
Now, those games are always, look, football's increasingly gone like that. If you're a top side or you're a side around the bottom, it's beat the teams in and around you. That's the key. That's going to define titles. And you say 9 points. It's more kind of 7 points in that sense. It's that extra kind of, it's just a huge amount of stopping City in their tracks as well. And obviously, it's a disappointing week for City. Draw in Copenhagen, getting a man sent off. And to be honest, they're pretty poor, and Copenhagen really would feel like that's a missed opportunity. And then going to Anfield, and as we've seen in the past, it's their hardest place to go. And it's a huge psychological effect now for Guardiola, how he bounces back his team. It's probably a good thing for Arsenal and for Man City that they're not playing Thursday. Obviously, Arsenal have to play PSV in a game that got rearranged post the Queen's death. And for City, it's probably something where they can, take a couple of days off and go back into it, and for a busy period now, right up until that World Cup. But it was a funny game because obviously being an Arsenal fan, the Arsenal game got delayed, so I didn't have too much excitement for the Liverpool City game, and I turned it on, and to be honest, I was really disappointed with the first 25, 30 minutes. I thought it was a pretty cagey game. Obviously, City were a little bit cagey because they were expecting the usual Anfield effect, the press and winning the ball high up the pitch. And Liverpool were really compact. They were really intense in their defending, which is something they've lacked recently. And it just shows you that a bit of intensity in your defending in this day and age, when you don't see an awful lot of it, goes an awful long way, because the fact that James Milner at, 36 years of age or so, was able to put in a performance like that was just all because he was so intense and disciplined in his tackling, in his positioning, and And as a result, Liverpool weren't their free-flowing best that we've seen at Anfield for the last 4 or 5 years under Jurgen Klopp. But they're a lot more rigid. They're a lot more hard to beat. And it was their best way of getting a result, considering where they are at the moment and some of the injuries they do have. On Man City, like it, Pep Guardiola is a genius, and whenever you talk about him, you have to really choose your words, because he can make you look like a fool, but he does have this tendency to at times just tinker and change things slightly. And I know we've seen Ake in left back before, and he's done well there, and obviously Cancelo can play high up the pitch. It just did feel a little bit strange that. And it was quite an interesting point that I think Gary Neville was trying to make on after the game, that it was almost De Bruyne couldn't operate in his usual pockets. He was kind of playing in off the wing, and City just didn't have that balance. And you look at Arsenal, and maybe Arsenal are a couple of, well, obviously they are a couple of years behind Man City in their progression, but Arsenal play almost a similar way to Man City in that it all revolves around their wide players and their connecting players beside it. So if you look at Arsenal's right-hand side, Martin Odegaard never operates off the left. He's always off the right in a sort of a link with Saka. And similar now, Xhaka's doing that link with Martinelli. And City have been so dominant for an awful long time with Bernardo Silva and Phil Foden on that left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side with a De Bruyne, or, you can play Foden on that side. But there's always the wide player and the midfield kind of link. Because the midfield link then operates in that kind of channel in those areas where they can play forward passes into the box. They can drag defenders to them and open up space for the wingers. So it did feel like City had gone away from that. And it also felt like between Rodri, Gundogan, Silva and De Bruyne, it did feel like to me, it was like Pep didn't want to leave one of them out. And obviously he had that decision made from in the Manchester derby when they had no Rodri. So it did feel like to me when I saw the team, it was like, he doesn't fully trust Grealish, and Mahrez isn't high on favour at the moment. And it also felt like he didn't want to drop one of them that kind of box in the midfield. So as a result, City weren't as effective. And I know they had chances, but considering where Liverpool are and I suppose the freedom Liverpool gave City, and like that first 45 is as easy a 45 minutes that a Man City team is going to have at Anfield. Liverpool were almost setting themselves up for the second half, and they came firing out of the blocks, and they made it. Salah got more into the game. Ederson produced a brilliant save, and Harvey Elliott had chances, and Liverpool still had chances in the first half, but in the second half they were getting a much better chance because City felt like they had to push on and try and stamp their authority on the match. So in the end, the game kind of fell into place for Liverpool. I think Jurgen Klopp would have been thinking that's how it would have played out, to his credit. But City will, and Pep Guardiola, when he looks back at that, will be really frustrated because you're not going to get an easier game at Anfield in that first 45. Yeah. They weren't able to capitalise.
You could see the frustration in the goal in that moment and him falling to his knees. But look, I fully agree with you on Pep Roulette. And I think the term Pep Roulette always, almost sort of does Pep a favor there. It's like, what Pep's like in big games. He tinkers around with the team with it. It's just fundamentally bad decisions constantly are costing Manchester City. And I heard a few people make this point, and it's fair enough. Like I think, and I agree with it. I think City would always. They've gone on to the new level from Pep Guardiola. There's no way another manager, maybe outside the top one or two, a Jurgen Klopp perhaps, a Thomas Tuchel perhaps, that could get these incredible points tally with this Manchester City team. But I definitely think another manager might have got Manchester City a Champions League just based on big games, picking the right team in big games. Chelsea in the Champions League final is one example. And let's go right to the Sunday, and it's another example. And even the way Jamie pointed out how high up the pitch Cancelo was, just doing stuff that they're not doing week in, week out. You touched on Jack Grealish. He's actually been playing for the last couple of games coming into it. It would have been a perfect opportunity to operate him on the left wing. I know what he was trying to do with Phil Foden potentially up against James Milner as opposed to Phil Foden off the right. So, and then look, they couldn't really get Haaland into the game. In fact, particularly first half, I thought Haaland came deep a lot to link the play, which I haven't really seen that much, given like there's certain stats that there's 8 touches a half from Haaland at times. So yeah, I think people are ultimately a little bit too kind to Pep Guardiola. You can be in awe of his incredible coaching, his credible management skill, the way he gets these outrageous league points totals in Germany, Spain, and England. But you can also say big games and big moments, Pep Guardiola doesn't do it. And again, on another show, I was chatting to someone and they were saying, like, you wouldn't rule out in a big Champions League semi-final, second leg, away to Bayern or at home to Bayern, that Pep wants to go with an extra midfielder and says, we'll bring Haaland off the bench because he was playing Sunday. Like, that's ludicrous, but it's not 100-1 shot, you know? And I think people are entitled to have that criticism of Pep Guardiola in big games, but you can also be in awe of his incredible coaching philosophy. But he needs a stronger assistant manager. Maybe he needs a Mikel Arteta in there as opposed to what he currently has. I don't know, but it's definitely an interesting point for sure.
Yeah. Look, when you think of Guardiola and the big mission is his record in the Champions League, and it's the ultimate knockout competition in club football. It is that you don't want to say form goes out the window, but you've seen it in the past where Chelsea have struggled in the league and won a Champions League, and there's other examples of that. And again, it's other examples of a team like an Inter Milan that just everything comes together in that one season, and they have a brilliant year, and under a brilliant manager win the Champions League. So the way City are going to win the Champions League is they're going to be the best team in England and ultimately then be the best team in Europe. Yeah, and all bar Guardiola's first year, had they not been the best team in England, and by the year Liverpool won the league. So it's to win the league and then win the Champions League and have that relentlessness is always, it's so hard to do. Very few teams have done it. You obviously look at the great United team in the 1999, and it is so hard to do. But for this City team, it does feel like the next step. But you're right. Look, the Champions League final where he played the no defensive midfielder, having not played one all year, and just small little things, and he's the game so well, who understands the game so much. I don't think it's, people maybe say he's trying to flex his muscles, but like, this guy's a genius. We've not really seen the likes of him before. So if he sees something in his head, I'm sure he sees it, A, for a valid good reason, and B, because he thinks it'll help him. That Amazon documentary, look, what is it now, 4 years ago, I think 3 years ago, that it came out, shed an awful lot of light. I saw the detail that they could win. I remember there was an afternoon where Guardiola and his coaching staff are having a dinner and they're watching Arsenal against Chelsea in the Carabao Cup semi-final a few years ago when it was Arsene Wenger's Arsenal, and he says, look, Arteta, you're going to be studying Arsenal. This is you for 2 weeks. I want blah blah blah, this and this and this. So, if you're studying it against the Liverpool, and there is certain teams that Pep Guardiola feels like he has to do something different. Always felt like that. It's felt like that against Klopp. That Chelsea game, he obviously felt like he had to do something because Chelsea were playing 3-5-2. So it's hard to know with Guardiola. This is look. I think if we'll know his ultimate legacy at the end of the season, because I think many people will feel that if he doesn't win the Champions League or even get to a Champions League final this year, then questions will be asked. But then again, you look at Bayern Munich. I saw them. I know that they haven't been playing much in the Champions League group, but you look at some of the goals they scored the last week. Mane seems to be finding a bit of form after a little bit of a slow start. They've got Sané, Gnabry, Kingsley Coman, Jamal Musiala looks like one of the best young talents in not just German football but European football. So there is and Liverpool obviously that are going to be kind of a wounded tiger. So there is, it's not going to be easy for Man City, and the competition maybe is getting harder. There's no two dominant sides like we've seen in the Barcelona era and then the Real Madrid era of the Sergio Ramos, Gareth Bale, Benzema, Ronaldo. So it's an interesting time. But look, it's this year is going to be the ultimate year to cast judgment on Guardiola.
Well, and just an interesting one, you look at the odds, they are more unlikely than likely to win the Champions League given the competition. You touched on Bayern, that you're kind of stealing my thunder there. I've been looking at them last few weeks. I think they're my pick. I was going to say dark horse, they're third favourites, but they'd be my pick at the moment, given how they've kind of got themselves together. One final thing you touched on there, I'm just smiling that I guess if you're a Mikel Arteta or a City assistant manager now, and Pep says 2 weeks study Liverpool, like you touched on, you can't come back with saying, "Oh, we got to play the same team." You know what I mean? So there's that sort of you spend 2 weeks and what we play our normal whatever 4-3-3. So look, it'll be fascinating how City tack these big games going forward.
I definitely think Haaland is changing a lot of Man City as well, and they're slowly maybe going to start getting used to him. You got to remember, like Man City played the whole of last year without a centre forward. They pretty much played most of the year before that. You know, Aguero's had these injuries issues prior to his exit at Man City. So they are, you know, not that you feel sorry for them, but you have to cut them maybe a little bit of slack in terms of they aren't used to playing with that big focal point. And as I said, look, last year, if Man City went into that game against Liverpool without and Guardiola wanted to play all of Silva, Rodri, Gundogan, and De Bruyne, it would have been no issue. They would have had an extra wide man. They would have probably played Bernardo or De Bruyne or Bernardo Silva as the false number 9. Now they can't really do that. We saw on Sunday what happens. Cancelo gets caught high up the pitch. De Bruyne isn't as far forward as he normally is because Man City won't pin teams back as easily as they do when they play with a front three. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. City will still win the league. I think will still win it pretty easy. I do like the look of Potter's Chelsea. Maybe you might see them compete in a cup, and Liverpool as well. So there's nothing to say Guardiola won't win a quadruple or a treble this year, but there is a few chinks in their armor recently that maybe they aren't they aren't invincible, but maybe they aren't that that they aren't that tough to play against anymore, which is a crazy thing to say with Haaland, but it does feel like there is ways around Man City. Then maybe they don't play as total football as they did last year.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I guess I had the alarm bells on City when they conceded those 3 goals against Newcastle. I think that was sort of forgotten in a lot of narratives because of Haaland's goals. So while I accept and I personally think they will probably still win the league, I think people who have written off a lot of Arsenal's chances, I wouldn't necessarily rule Arsenal out to still be in the run in February, March. And the main reason is if this was a normal season, do Arsenal have the squad to have a Premier League title challenge? I think ultimately they would probably fall short. But the fact is you can get to a World Cup after 16 games, you can get to a January transfer window after 17, 18 games, you could probably bring in a reinforcement that could be the difference. And I would touch on, I didn't want to talk about Arsenal on the podcast, but very briefly, that you need a bit of luck sometimes, right? So Arsenal played Tottenham at home at the start in the first spell of the season, got that win. And then if they had Liverpool away from home in Anfield, given that performance they put up against City, I just don't really see Arsenal getting a win at Anfield, even with Liverpool's form. But the fact they got them at home and they did a lot wrong in that game and still managed to win. They've actually gone to Leeds when everything was wrong against them, the Europa League, traveling away, getting back on a Friday, getting the bus up to Leeds on a Saturday. And I have to say, I was so impressed with Leeds, and we'll get into them in another show. But they were, because I hadn't really been impressed in the last 4 or 5 games. But Arsenal still won the game. And I definitely think they've got a 4-point head start on a Manchester City team. I don't see them falling away as some people would potentially see it. So the things you touched on with City's defence, absolutely. And look, as I said, 33 goals they've scored this season in the Premier League. City. It's been amazing. But I guess Haaland's goal rates cannot be as sustainable as they are in this short period of time. But who knows?
Yeah, and also, look, we aren't going to talk about Arsenal too much. As I said, anything can happen this year because of the transfer window and the earliness of it in the league. You got to remember, Arsenal signed Jesus and Zinchenko in the summer with no Champions League football. Arsenal's still in a very attractive place to play, obviously with the fact that it's in London. And it's not like Jesus and Zinchenko are on huge wages. Arsenal have learned from the hard way with Ozil and Aubameyang that they aren't going to break their wage structure as much as they have done in the past. Now, that will be tested with Saliba, Martinelli, Saka, the contracts of these players coming up. So I think if Arsenal got to January, now there is talks, paper talk about a Locatelli. Arsenal has to be one of the most exciting football projects in Europe at this moment. Like you look at the French league now. I watched a bit of PSG Marseille. PSG just they look an absolute embarrassment with Mbappe at the moment. They're obviously, look, if you get asked to join PSG, I don't think you'll say no, but it does seem to be a big mess. You look at a lot of the Italian clubs, maybe a Napoli that are coming through. They look frightening at the moment in the Champions League. Bayern Munich have always been strong, but Arsenal have to be up there with one of those teams that people are taking note of now. And if you got asked to join Mikel Arteta, it's Arsenal at the moment, and he gives you a plan of action. There aren't too many clubs, maybe, by the top ones that aren't players wouldn't join. So it's a long way. I don't think Arsenal will win the league. I think it's all in City's hands, but there is a lot to be said for them at the moment. But as I said, look, Liverpool will come good again. But I must say, but before I finish on Liverpool, I like the way they went back to basics. And Klopp's been very critical of teams that have come to Anfield and sat in. And he had a go at Conte last year. He's had a go at Eddie Howe, and he's always. I remember when Liverpool, the year they won the league, went to Old Trafford against Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, drew late on with a Lallana goal. He came into that the post-match interview with Sky, and he was saying, how can Man United with all these players play at home and play like that? Play not to lose. And United had James and Dan James and Marcus Rashford up front, and it was just try and catch Liverpool on the break. Liverpool did a bit of that. They sat in they earned the right to win, and the first 45 minutes was a pretty cagey game. Liverpool still had chances, but the second half they came alive. And it's an awful shame for Liverpool and Portugal that Jota's now out till the world after the World Cup. Diaz similar. So Liverpool's squad is going to be tested, but that's that's the nature of the game. And I think we will see a lot of players miss the World Cup through injury. I think we've seen an awful lot already. It's just a crazy time of the year to be having a World Cup.
You think like a player like Van Dijk, World Cup coming up, he missed the Euros, he's got to be minding himself, which I personally think had to have been in the back of his mind. But on Sunday, it felt like he was probably one of the best performances I've seen from him, and he's been the best centre half in the world the last few years, maybe outside the start of this season. And look, very briefly, Arsenal play similar, or trying to play similar to Man City, but I do have a lot of similarities with them and the Liverpool, Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool when they first came on the scene, and everyone's saying, well, if they get an injury to Salah, Mane, Firmino, they'll fall away. The fact is they didn't. So if Arsenal do stay injury free, particularly with that front four and Partey, I definitely think they can stay with City for foreseeable. So yeah, we'll move on to a little bit more of the Premier League and talk about the Premier League sack race. Is the grabby headline we have for you here on YouTube, but I think this is more to talk about a couple of clubs in particular that are under pressure, and particularly Steven Gerrard, Sean, and Aston Villa. And look, there were serious rumours. I saw a great tweet saying, geez, if you believed everything Steven Gerrard got in the fight last night and all this, and there was massive rows, and he's been sacked and he's been back. But the reality is, I don't think he'll be sacked this week, just based on maybe the last 24 hours, but this is all ever changing. What are your thoughts on what he's been doing? Because in fairness to Villa and Steven Gerrard, while I personally don't see, and I have said it on the podcast, a future for him, his two best performances this season have come at home to Manchester City and at home to Chelsea side, who I thought, from watching bits of it and then catching the full highlight show, I thought Chelsea were pretty decent, yet Villa still managed to create those chances. And in another day, they get that equaliser, and who knows what happens.
Yeah, I mean, the whole Gerrard, Hasenhüttl, Rodgers at the moment, and there's other managers there. It does feel like something's going to give to one of them soon. Look, from what I saw, because obviously I went to watch the Arsenal game and it got delayed, so I watched a good bit of the first half, and Villa were already 1 down, but they were outstanding. Just couldn't score. Kepa made a couple of brilliant saves, and again, what a return to action for him at Chelsea.
Can I just get my little I've been banging the Mendy's not good enough, and the first thing Tuchel will do in the summer is upgrade the goalkeeper, and the first thing Graham Potter's done is not upgrade the keeper but just put in Kepa. But time will tell whether Kepa's good enough. But I think when Mendy's representatives were looking for a new contract a couple of weeks before Tuchel got sacked, I think they knew as much as I did that he's just not quite at the level to play football the way a Chelsea side should be able to if they want to win the league.
Yeah, and as I said, Villa forced him into making a lot of good saves, and Villa kind of, it's hard with Gerrard because a lot of their fans are giving out saying they don't have a style of play. But if you were to say something about Villa, is in that first half they kept the intensity on Chelsea. They sustained pressure on them. Just couldn't find a goal. They should have found one. McGinn had the chance when he could have squared it to Danny Ings. Then there was the double save. And look, if you're Villa, you're very disappointed not to get something. I know the Villa fans weren't happy after the game. Gerrard didn't acknowledge the fans, and small little things like that just show you all's not well. Then you have Southampton at the moment, and they just feel like they're meandering along. They're kind of waiting for something to happen. Hassan Hootel he's quite a likable character. You know, there's all that stuff in lockdown, him making dossiers about this the way to play, and Southampton are kind of trying to build up through their academy this identity of playing. But they have a really young squad, of a really young defence. But they seem to be kind of, as I say, meandering along. And as for Leicester, just missing Maddison now in midweek with his 5th yellow card. Vardy just seems to be really off the pace. And
just on Maddison, I thought that was idiotic. Not just because he's in my fantasy team and going into the game, I knew a yellow card would do it. I mean, there's a way to dive like Harry Kane does, and everyone gives out about Harry Kane, but he maneuvers the contact. Like, that was just so naive from Maddison, wasn't it?
Yeah, and look, fair play. I can't remember who was ref, but I was actually watching the game live when it happened, and straight away it felt like a penalty. It felt straight away like, whether it was a full dive or there was little to none contact, it was the right decision anyway. Look, he's such an important player for them, and as a manager, when things aren't going your way, things like that happen. Well, for Stray, Brendan Rodgers, they've kept a couple of clean sheets now. That the Forest game, they kept a clean sheet just about now, and they kept one obviously against Palace, but they couldn't capitalise, and they're still rooted down near the bottom. And obviously, you'd have Steve Cooper naturally on this list of managers under pressure. But, you know, the big contract he got last week, which I thought was the right decision, because if you are to stick behind a manager, you gotta, I suppose, support him in his down moments. And again, like Nottingham Forest,
it should have been given in the summer though, shouldn't it?
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Look, you got to remember the job he did last year with Forest. They were a club just absolutely going nowhere in the Championship, almost like, and it's a funny one because you get to a stage where you look at Ipswich. Ipswich very similar to the position Forest were when Steve Cooper took over. So Mick McCarthy managing Ipswich kind of got them oftentimes to the playoffs. They had a bad playoff semi-final defeat to Norwich round 2015, I'd say. Then obviously he gets sacked a couple of years later. All of a sudden, the new manager comes in, and then Norwich's their biggest rivals, Norwich's ex-manager Paul Lambert, comes in to save the day, keep them up in the Championship. They get relegated down to League One. Then they're down there for a couple of years, and all of a sudden, from being a mediocre mid-table Championship side, they were down plummeted then to League One. There's huge issues with Marcus Evans, their owner. They're actually kind of building something at the minute. Kieran McKenna, Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as assistants there now, but that's where Forest were. They were kind of they were doing nothing in the Championship. So the job Steve Cooper has done is there's a reason why the Nottingham Forest fans love him. I was surprised, to be honest, when he got the big deal from the owner, because the owner seems to be really ambitious. Obviously, 22 players come in, over 100 million spent.
Yeah, it's important to note that they sacked the recruitment team as well.
Yeah, and they have a really young CEO, Dane Murray, I think, and a new technical director, so that they are kind of trying to build some. I think they're very confident they'll stay up. I watched that Wolves Nottingham game. There was very little in the game. It was two penalties, a really poor penalty by Brennan Johnson, and that's the one thing I would say Forest maybe do lack, and maybe Dennis can step into those shoes. But I think their number 9, the striker they signed, Adedowane, I think his name is. I think I got that wrong. But he scored obviously at the start of the season. I think it was against West Ham. But I still think they kind of lack a big presence at number 9. You think of what Kiefer Moore can often give Bournemouth. You look at some of the other teams. Look at the Samaka. I know West Ham spent big money on it, but he looks a real presence. I just think Forest are missing that at the moment.
Incidentally, they're 0-0 half-time away to Brighton, which is, we're recording this 20:08 on Tuesday, but just to let the listeners know there, however, they finished up 0-0 at half-time. I haven't seen any of it, but just FYI.
Yeah, and as I said, like, they'll be really disappointed they didn't get something at Wolves. Two kind of poor enough penalties. There was nothing in the game. Wolves has historically been a difficult place to go, but Wolves obviously under Steve Davis, the caretaker manager. I think Steve Cooper, his demeanour on the sideline felt like it was a missed opportunity. But like you look at Hassan Hootle, Gerard Rogers, they're under big pressure. Look, I was actually looking at it. So before the show, Lodge, Parker, and Tuchel, 3 managers already sacked. They're all kind of they weren't guarantees for the sack either. You look at Thomas Tuchel, I think no one was really expecting it. Maybe there was a little bit of whispers. Scott Parker, obviously off the back of the 9-0, but it was more his antics in the press and obviously a bit of discourse. The Bruno Lage one, yes, Wolves haven't been playing well, but they just spent an awful lot of money in the summer and tried to change from a back 5 to a back 4 now, and they've brought players in to play the back 4, and they've lost their Bolly and Cody and Duncan and guys that were staple at their back 5 before. So that just, and the fact that Wolves haven't appointed anyone also feels like a bit of a silly decision.
It's a nonsense, Sean, isn't it? That you can sack someone without a replacement. I know it's not the nicest thing in the world to be approaching managers before you sack, but at least have a plan in place. It reminds me of Spurs looking for that manager when they ended up signing Nuno, and look how badly that finished. So, and incidentally and coincidentally, Nuno was linked, and I don't think he is getting the Wolves job anymore.
Now, I know Rodgers was different when he took over at Leicester, and this is his second contract he's on. But you look at the payout he's reportedly lying to get when it does happen. When you go like that to a manager and you had appointed one in a couple of weeks, and there's a couple of games go by, the manager that comes in is going to go, well, look, they have you where they want you. They're going to say, well, I want all this money and this and this. Similar situation to Celtic in the summer before they got Ange Postecoglou. That every manager under the sun was linked, and then they absolutely hit gold with Postecoglou.
Stumbled, yeah, similar to Arsenal and Wenger, I guess.
Yeah, and like I was looking at the Championship, so there's 3 clubs currently without managers. West Bromwich Albion, who've just sacked Steve Bruce. I don't know how they only just sacked him. They're in 20th. 21st are Hull, with new Turkish owners, brought a Turkish manager in during the summer, just all over the place.
Yeah, and just tell the listeners they sacked their manager after an international break on the Friday morning when they had a game the Friday night.
8 hours, yeah, so exactly that. 8 hours before they were due to play on the Monday. The Friday night it was against Luton, and it was the game. Lansbury scored a brilliant goal, I think, and they sacked him off not waiting for the international break. They sacked him 8 hours before the Friday night game, which was interesting. They're in 21st, and the team in 22nd, Middlesbrough, are without a manager. So the 3 teams just above in and around the drop zone at the minute are without managers. Middlesbrough, a big link with Michael Carrick, but teams who've had managerial changes: West Brom, Middlesbrough in the Championship, West Brom, Middlesbrough, Hull, Watford, Cardiff, Huddersfield, and Stoke. And then obviously Sunderland and Rotherham have both lost managers as well, but they've moved to different clubs. So it's crazy what is going on in the managerial game. Also, like to look closer to home, Bowes obviously sacked Keith Long, bring in Derek Pender, who's known in the club, huge legend in the club, obviously takes over as caretaker manager, and then it just feels like they've gone looking for everyone before they've stumbled on Declan Devine, who is an really interesting character. Obviously managed Derry. He's been involved in teams with Northern Ireland as well in the past, I think, underage as well. But also like them, like if you sack a manager, especially someone like Keith Long who's been there an awful long time, you kind of want to be sounding out a replacement for him. And similar in the Premier League, in the Championship with Wolves, with Middlesbrough, who Wilder's been gone quite a while now. So it's just these. You wonder what these clubs are doing in the background. Like, why aren't they ready for this? But it's again, it was similar when Arsenal sacked Unai Emery. They had Freddie Ljungberg in charge for a few games, and just And the worst thing, that the one with Arsenal was that everyone knew Unai Emery was coming to the end. We just had the Crystal Palace incident with Xhaka. Arsenal were getting battered by every team we played, and eventually after Europa League game, they sacked him, but they didn't really have it. Then they started their interviews then, kind of like as if, oh well, we've sacked him now. Like who's going to go in?
Yeah, well, that's tomorrow morning's issue. Yeah, no, it's crazy. There's no foresight, and some clubs like you quickly on Michael Carrick, like if they had Middlesbrough from word go, it said Michael Carrick, you're our man, you kind of understand it a little bit, but like it almost like there's a week or two gone by now, it's Michael Carrick talk, so it's definitely an afterthought. Like whether he'll be good or not remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I kind of like that appointment. I think he'd be pretty good. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's from somewhere up around there. Could be wrong on that, but also the longest serving manager in the Championship's Mark Robbins, who's been there, I think, since 2017. Coventry are now bottom of the Championship, so the job he's done is unquestionable. He's been brilliant. Been disappointed this year. They've drawn quite a few games, I think. So we could easily have another name added to this list. So it's just bonkers in the Championship. The Premier League is getting to that that stage now where you think managers are going to be sacked. You think of those three, Rodgers, Hasenhüttl, and Gerrard. You think could well be gone. Those three managers wouldn't surprise me if they're gone in the next 10 days or so.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of midweek prem for those listening. This one could have already got the bullet there, but yeah, that's interesting thoughts there regarding Premier League and a little insight into the Championship there, which is genuinely lives up to being the craziest and best league in the world. I think if you haven't been on Twitter, you wouldn't have seen those crazy stats of how teams are somewhere. And can you run through that in about 10 seconds, Sean? Like, Burnley have like done this and they're first or whatever.
Well, Michael Carrick actually is from up the northeast as well, which I'll take. But there's 5 teams. I think the top 5 teams in the Championships are separated by 1 point. Burnley, Sheffield United are both the top 2. Then you got Blackburn under their new manager. Obviously, Tony Mowbray was relinquished of his duties in the summer. He's with Sunderland now, but the new manager, Dal Thompson, seems to be doing a pretty good job. And Michael Beale, who was Gerrard's number 2 at Rangers and Villa, credited with a lot of Gerrard's success at Rangers.
Yes.
He's flying with QPR. And it's funny because I was at the QPR Derby game last year when Derby got relegated. I was in the away end with the Derby fans, but there just seemed like there was something at QPR, like there was something that you could kind of see that there was a bit of a feel-good factor there. Jimmy Dunn at the back. Ireland, Jimmy Dunn was fantastic. But Elias Chair really caught my eye, and he played. They played Redden on TV a couple of weeks ago, and he's a really impressive player for Moroccan number 10 kind of style of player. Really similar to Ben Rama. That kind of influence that Ben Rama had in the Brentford team, similar to QPR, and they seem to be going along nicely. Paul Ince is up with Reading, with Andy Carroll up front wearing number 2. Tom Ince is playing as well. And one thing, Watford. I watched Watford on Friday night.
I know they were unbelievable.
Yeah, and I must say, there's 2 things. I thought Mick McCarthy was outstanding on commentary.
I couldn't across you again, Sean, but the three in the boot, I loved it.
Andy Hinchcliffe and Mick McCarthy. I thought, Mick just I think what he's so good as a commentator, because he can see what a manager sees. So he's saying, look, there was a passage of play where for 5 minutes Watford just kept a couple of passes straight to Ismail Sarr on the left wing, and Mick McCarthy was going, look, there's no 2 ways about trying to get up to Sarr, and Sarr's going to run at Max Ernst. But where football has gone through the roof in 10 years, like to have a player like Ismail Sarr playing in the Championship is like a cheat code. And the thing with him is he turns it on. He's one of those players, like if he was in any way consistent, he'd be long gone out of there. But he produced 2 moments of quality. One was the ball in for the Watford first goal, and then the second goal was just an outrageous bit of skill and ability to beat Aarons and get the ball across. And Watford, I think, appointed very shrewdly in Savin Bilic. I think that's a really good appointment, and I think they're going to be the team that just finds a bit of form, goes mouldering. You'd be questioned about them slightly at the back, but going forward with Keenan Davis as well, obviously Forrest is number 9 last year. I think that they'll go an awful long way. But Norwich came back into that game. Amadama Belli came off injured right at the end, which is a bit of a worry, but he looks like he's slowly getting back up to the pace. And obviously Adam Ida is still injured, and you'd be really worried because as a young player, if you're getting injuries consistently like that, it's not good going forward.
Yeah, Watford only 5 points off the league. I definitely think they'd be a dark horse, if that's the right description, to win it, let alone get promoted. So definitely could be right up there in the top of the market there. Very briefly, Sean, because we went way over on that. The GAA Club Finals, brilliant win for Crokes in the Dublin Senior Football Championship. Obviously, Shane Walsh was instrumental in that. But your thoughts maybe on the standard of club football? I think standard is probably the wrong word. Maybe the attacking quality going forward. I guess teams are so well set up and know each other so well that you end up with these games that aren't great on the eye outside of moments of brilliance from the likes of Shane Walsh and a Paul Mannion if he was playing.
Yeah, I watched the Donegal game as well. Unans and Nave Connell, and to be honest, I wasn't overly impressed. It was Nave Connell that came out as winners, but they kind of sat in. It's someone made an interesting point. It's like club football is where intercounty football was pre-pandemic in terms of the way teams are set up, and that evolution we've seen in the intercounty game. Basically, that what knockout championship football brought for a couple of seasons has fed into the county sides now. We're seeing a more attacking, less blanket defence style of play, but we maybe aren't seeing that in the club game and are a lot less likely to throw caution to the wind. The Donegal game, look, it's really teaching. Obviously, there was a red card. A lot of look, it's very hard for officials, but I think they probably did get that right, or get that wrong rather. I wasn't overly impressed, but it was still one of them. Like you were still watching it. Now the Dublin Senior Football County Final on Sunday, I actually watched, kind of large spells of it because, as I said, I wasn't that impressed with the first half of Liverpool City. And
hard man to impress, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe. Yeah, I was also I wanted to watch Crokes and Na Fianna, and I felt at times I kept switching back because I was so annoyed with some of the shooting in the Crokes Na Fianna game. It's particularly from Na Fianna in the second half. But it was quite an interesting county final because you've got the two biggest clubs on either side of the Liffey. Not in terms of prestige and history. Look, I think
members.
Yeah, at the moment where they're going, what they've done at underage, where Na Fianna and Kilmacud in football and hurling seem at most age groups to be in Division 1, and that's always a telltale sign really of success. Because there are certain clubs and in Dublin that might have brilliant age groups and might have a couple of brilliant years, and then they could well be Division 3 or something at another age group. But Kilmacud Crokes and Na Fianna seem to be staples at the top end of all underage groups. But there was a bit of booing of Shane Walsh, and there was a bit of he's one of our own, and it just felt like a real side story to it. And look, it's the essence of GAA that a player might leave his county or his city or his country and go to somewhere else and play Gaelic games, and you still feel connected to your club, I'm sure. And every club, I would say, benefits from it. A lot of clubs, because of what's going on with the cost of living crisis, are going to be benefiting from it. If you're working in Dublin, you may be living and you're from, say, Galway or Kerry, you might be living in Kildare now. Obviously, we Jack O'Connor's son playing with Moorfield for a long time. So it happens everywhere. That the whole drama with the Shane Walsh tobacco, the fact that it's obviously a couple of weeks out before the Dublin Championship that the news broke, the fact his club came out, which I think they were probably wrong to do, and the fact that his club came out so strongly probably highlighted that there's probably issues they feel with it. And again, he is one of the best footballers in the country. He was actually, there was a score he got in the second half where he was getting kind of ironically booed, which is pretty ironic coming from Na Fianna with some of the players that they've had down through the years.
That deserves a mention, but yeah, go on.
But he's kind of getting ironically cheered, and it's kind of it's almost pantomime stuff. And he picks up the ball. No one, for some reasons, within 20 yards of him. He goes by a couple of players and he puts one over on his right foot, and you're just thinking he is one of the best players in the country. We saw that at the latter end of the championship in that All Ireland final, and it's just a big kind of side story to it. There's also probably with Shane Walsh, there's probably a level of information we don't know, And we probably do we deserve to know in terms of, is he living close to Kilmacud? Is there kind of arrangements? Because he spoke about he was in Galway the couple of days before the county final and stuff, but there's no denying that he, considering Mannion's injury, he just feels like he slotted seamlessly into Crokes and dominated that county final. He kicked poor wides as well, but his influence on that Crokes team looks like he's been playing for 5 or 6 years, and obviously had that injury, the kind of the head injury late in that first half, and still to come on the second half and kick some brilliant scores. He's a phenomenon. I think next year is the kind of the litmus test again. Like the reason David Clifford's held in such high regard, and Kieran Kilkenny and Conor Callaghan, is they've done it for 2 or 3 championships, and in Callaghan and Kilkenny state case, they've done it for 4 or 5 championships, and they do it year in, year out. And that'll be the next question with Walsh, if he gets elevated to that kind of elite player status, if he can do it next year and he can help Galway A win the Connacht Championship and B kick on again. But there's no denying his influence in that Kilmacud Crokes side. And look, there is a larger question, and it's maybe one for a podcast episode, that the Dublin club scene isn't as strong as maybe it was at the peak of the Dublin side, at the peak of the 5 in a row side, and the standard wasn't too high. But there are clubs up and coming, but there's no denying that Kilmacud and Na Fianna will be there or thereabouts for the next 4 or 5 years. And Ryan O'Dwyer actually said when he was doing on RT when Kilmacud Crokes beat Bowden in the hurling semi-final, he said, he kind of along the lines of Kilmacud Crokes will win the next 10 hurling county titles. So there's no denying their strength. But it'll be interesting, that game, the hurling final on Sunday. And Na Fianna obviously really unlucky last year in the county final. They've got Liam Rush themselves from St. Pat's of Palmerstown at centre half back. Obviously moved to Na Fianna. There was issues there with Palmerstown, I think, and not having a team and stuff like that, and he made the move to Na Fianna. So it'll be really interesting, that game as well on Sunday.
Yeah, you mentioned the club size. I think Na Fianna are 3,500 members, and Kilmacud Crokes are very close to 6,000 with 140 plus teams. So it's a lot.
And it's funny, like you look at Ballyhale, and again, I turned that game on, and there was a score in that game, and it's actually the one that got clipped on Twitter, but I turned the hurling on nearly the exact moment, and me and my dad were watching it, and we were like, there was it's a sequence, we might tweet it out later, but I'm sure a lot of people have seen it, and Evan Shefflin scored a point. He got in free space, but the skill from Adrian Mullen when the ball comes out of the air, touches it down, TJ Reid's skill, it's just whatever about the standard of club football. The standard of club hurling is honestly through the roof, and it's a joy to watch. And now Eddie Brennan said that TJ Reid's the greatest ever. He nailed his colours to the mast, but what Ballyhale consistently do and what TJ Reid does is it is phenomenal. And that score from a small little club in County Kilkenny, and it's funny because, look, I always say, and I refer to another sports, like if you're picking a footballer you want, it's I always think of football as an attacking player being from South America and being quite diminutive and being like a Messi or a Carlos Tevez or Suarez. If you were to pick a hurler, you'd probably pick one from County Kilkenny. Haven't seen Shefflin grow up. You'd say he'd go to St. Kieran's College and he'd wear the black and amber of Kilkenny, and like TJ Reid's skill. He took a catch as well in that game in the second half, Dan, and it is out of this world. His hang time is ridiculous. He's actually getting fouled as he's going to catch the ball, and TJ Carr like their club coverage is outstanding, and
Nice.
give credit to RT as well. And it is, I'm actually quite enthused about overall the split season. Again, we'll get into it again, but TJ Reid catches this ball.
Been telling you since day one, baby.
TJ Reid catches this ball down, and it's like breathtaking stuff. He's phenomenal. Ballyhale phenomenal, and Kilmacud Crokes in the men's club football will take an awful lot of beating as well.
I read some good stuff on TJ Reid, and it's some good points about like we always try and retire these people, but they're literally at the top of their game. Do you know what I mean? Like why
But
can't they just drop a little bit in a couple of years and still be like the third or fourth best player on the team if he has
you
to,
know what?
because he's just so good.
What impressed me most about TJ Reid is like, and it's the sign of a good player. Like Kilkenny haven't been at their best. They haven't won an All Ireland. I think is it since 2016. They certainly haven't been where they were under Cody, right? But his performances year on, year out, even if Kilkenny don't win a Leinster, they don't win an All Ireland, he's still one of the best hurlers in the country, and that ultimately is the sign of a top player. And look, I haven't been around too long to decide whether he's the greatest. You'd have Joe Canning and people like Henry Shefflin in that conversation. But what TJ Reid has done, I think, at the moment, he is elevating the bar, and particularly with his catching, it is phenomenal.
He's like the 2015. Is that All Ireland? And last thing on Kilmacud's win. Look, I am uncomfortable when the best player in the country, in my opinion, at least in the top three, joins the biggest club in the country. But I'm at the same time, I'm also like, absolutely somebody should, if they're moving up to Dublin, should be entitled to play. You touched on we don't know enough about it, which is completely true. But I think it's okay for people to be both, to be let them play, but I'm still not overly happy about it. But you know, and I do think the nasty comments go way too far, of course. But I do think people can still be unhappy. They don't necessarily should, or they probably shouldn't be venting it on replies on Twitter threads. But I am very slightly uncomfortable with it for sure.
Yeah, I'm in that bracket. Look, and the question is, do we know enough? No. Do we need to know enough? Like, is it any of our business?
No.
Probably not. But I think it's become our business by the way the Kilkerran chairman and the club came out against it. That's when it raised alarm bells for me, going, oh, like what, like is there? You know, we don't know again what's going on there. But one thing I would say, I don't think Kilmacud Crokes helped himself with that tweet. I think it was a bit provocative. Obviously, look, I'd say there was a bit of alcohol consumed at that stage. They've just won the county title. They've had obviously won it in the ladies, going for the hurling. They're obviously high on life, but I thought the tweet was a bit provocative. But obviously, when you're county champions, I'm sure you can do that. But one thing you have to say, Dan, look, Shane Walsh playing is
he's amazing.
It's frightening.
It's amazing, but it's just the 2 feet, brilliant, and Clifford as well. Like the fact we talk about them now and it's in the same breath, while Clifford is undisputedly the best in the country. The fact he's up there, I know, not just off that performance, but in general. But I would, before you come in, I would like to point out that I know he's been integrated in the club a lot, and he's done a lot of work already in the academy, and it's not just a case of getting a quick buck. And my understanding is that he's been brought in. And look, when you're a young kid and looking at it from Kilmacud Crokes' side point of view, you're a young kid, you've got Shane Walsh playing in the team. You know, it's pretty inspiring stuff. It's just, you know, look, it's a series of unfortunate events. The way how, like, it was always going to be a big story, but like you said, the way it drip drab came out was unfortunate for all. But look, he has been integrated in the club. He has done a lot of work with the academy as well. So look, I do think that needs to be pointed out.
And to go back to Clifford and Walsh, how I describe them is like David Clifford's like Haaland. It's like numbers, goal, score. Clifford can go left foot, right foot. He can jump high. He can do everything in the game. Whereas with Walsh, there's a bit more like, I'm the showman. I'm a maverick. I'm going to do dummies. I'm going to shoot on my left just because I can. And he's a bit more of that kind of, you know, compared to me. He's a little bit more like Messi in terms of that. But obviously what Clifford has done for the last 3 or 4 years has him above him. But they are really different players, but quite similar as well.
I see the old Ronaldo, the Ronaldo at Manchester United in Shane Walsh when you were talking there. Not too I see. Right foot, left foot, dancing, the odd step over, but with these little flicks, you know, brilliant stuff. Sean, black cover there. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Dan.
At Tackling Sport, get us on the social medias. We appreciate if you're watching the video, do give us a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's a lot of reviews you can do now, and give us a 5-star rating. Spotify, Apple, all is much appreciated. We'll be back next week. And for now, enjoy the sport. Take care, and we'll chat to you then. Bye-bye.